Hello. One piece of advice that my APO teacher gave me at the beginning of the year was that to make sure to study Russia, because a lot of times students don't study Russia and then it doesn't end up good for them. So we did this series of flipgrid videos that we had to make for class, so I always made sure to make mine about Russia if I could, because we needed to know Russia, I guess. So anyways, enjoy this compilation of those videos plus a little extra information so you can have a whole history of Russia. So, it's late 15th century in Europe. In 1453, Constantinople falls. The Byzantine Empire is extremely weak, which is not good for the Christian states of Western Europe because it served as a buffer state between the Ottomans, which were an Islamic empire. Now, in this time period, the Mongols over in Russia also left Russia in the year 1480, leaving Russia to be an independent state. The same year, Ivan III, who is not to be confused with Ivan the Terrible, declared Russia a free state. He thought that Russia would become the third Rome, the first being Rome, the second being the Byzantine Empire, and the third to take over the Byzantine Empire, Russia. At the end of Ivan the Terrible's reign, Russia really wasn't doing so hot until Peter the Great came along, and he was an absolute wild man who took Russia from being not organized to having a strong central government and being a military European power. So how did he do this? Well, he was very big into this thing called Westernization. Prior to Peter's reign, Russia was more Asian and more Eastern, and he thought, well, all the military powers right now, they're European. So let's be more like them. So he decided that they should westernize their culture, westernize their clothing. He implemented a beard tax so that men would shave their beards to be like European nobles. And another thing that he did was he westernized his military tactics. He hired military people from Prussia and Scotland and Sweden, you know, all the great military powers. And then the next step was to become a naval power and a commercial power like the Italian city-states or Denmark. So to do that, he would need warm water ports so he could trade. So he decided to start some wars. So he fought in, well, the Azov campaign for the Azov Sea near the Black Sea, which he was defeated, and then he came back with a really great navy and then won. And then also the Great Northern War against Sweden for Baltic territory, which he also won, so that Russia could become a commercial power. Now, another thing he did was centralize the government. There was 3 groups of people that were threats to the Tsar, or the king. There's the Streltsky, which were basically like elite military, and they rebelled, so they got squashed. There was the Patriarch, which was the head of the Roman Orthodox Church, so basically a pope, but Russian. And he got rid of him. And then the boyars. Ivan the Terrible had kind of subdued their power, but Peter the Great created a system where the boyars would advance, the nobility would advance their ranks based on merit, not on family history, which means they would have to be loyal to him in order to increase. So basically he got a bunch of loyal nobles and got rid of hereditary nobility. Now, in the end, Russia became a great power in Europe and would remain so until World War I. Countries like Poland were unable to do this because there was no trust or leadership skills in their nobility to find a suitable leader like Peter the Great. As we move into the landed nobility of Eastern Europe, things get a lot worse for people who do not own land, aka the serfs. First off, was the government and military power that the nobility had. All military and government officials, like people who had lots of power, were nobility, and especially in Russia. Now, in France, people could work their way up through the military with the robe nobles. Not in Eastern Europe. You had to be born into the family. There was absolutely no taxation on the nobility, which meant the serfs paid all the taxes. And they also had legal power over the serfs. In Russia, they could exile serfs to Serbia, and Poland, they could sentence them to death nobles could sentence serfs to death if they really wanted to. Remember this man, Peter the Great, who created the table of ranks so that nobles would have to be loyal to him to advance, and basically created the Russian nobility? Yeah, well, later on in the line of Romanovs, there was Catherine the Great. She had the Charter of Nobility, which basically reaffirmed the rights of the nobles in Russia, and is the most prevalent example of the nobles' rights over the serfs. Present day Emma, back to tell you about the last Catherine the Great, who was an absolutist monarch, like Peter the Great or Louis XIV, but she had a special title. She was known as an enlightened absolutist or an enlightened despot, which is kind of questionable because she didn't take on a lot of reform, but it was good for her reputation. Catherine definitely had some absolutist aspirations because she overthrew her husband in a coup and took all the power and declared herself Catherine II of Russia. And she also had a reliance on nobility, though, because she knew that just like she did, the nobility or the military could rise up and overthrow her in a coup. So she was like, hey, let's all be friends. I'll pass the Charter of Nobility. You give a little, I give a little. It'll be great times. But she also liked enlightened ideas, and she was a patron of enlightened philosophers like Diderot. All this kind of came together with the Pugachev Rebellion, which was a peasant uprising demanding more rights and representation, which at first she kind of dealt with nicely, but in the end she put it down very violently. Some more specific details, the Charter of Nobility again. She also encouraged westernization like Peter the Great, and she expanded the Russian Empire with the partitions of Poland. Russia brought the beginning of the end for Napoleon's dynasty. Napoleon employed the continental system, which was a universal boycott of British imports and exports among his allied and conquered territories. Because it was designed by Napoleon and France, it benefits France and not Russia. So Russia pulls out in 1810, which kind of pisses off Napoleon and in his eyes makes Russia no longer an ally. So Napoleon invades Russia in 1812. Because the Russians are outnumbered by the French army, they use the scorched earth tactic and they burn everything in their path as they outrun the French army to avoid actual fighting. Napoleon is forced to retreat, and this is a loss for him that is bad for his image and his power, and his army is significantly reduced. This is the beginning of the end for Napoleon, and he is beaten by Prussia, Austria, and Russia in 1813, and he abdicates the throne or emperorship in 1814. In 1825, the autocratic Tsar Alexander I died, and there was a bunch of questioning, who was going to be the new Tsar. Turns out it was going to be Nicholas I, another conservative autocrat, and the Moscow regiment refused to swear an oath of allegiance to him, and they demanded a constitution, so all of them were murdered, and the Decembrist revolt was crushed and an epic failure. However, it was symbolic because even in Russia, constitutionalism and liberalism could take a hold. Autocracy and Russian government go hand in hand, from Peter the Great and Catherine the Great to Nicholas I. But after a crippling defeat in the Crimean War, it was clear that Russia needed to update. After signing the Treaty of Paris in 1856, Alexander II decided to try his hand at reform and government reorganization. He said, "So great a work should begin from above that it might not proceed from below." Similar to Peter the Great's table of ranks reform, which worked from the top of the government down, and also showed a rising fear of peasant revolt or serf uprisings. His largest reform was to abolish serfdom, but he also established zemstvos, which were local municipalities and committees. He also introduced European ideals of justice in his judicial reforms, including impartial hearings and independent judges. He also reformed the Russian military. Young students originally liked the reforms, but it soon became apparent that the reforms didn't actually help peasants all that much. Radical students formed a group called Land and Liberty, who were social revolutionaries who, like the ideas of Marx, thought that social change would come from an uprising of the working class or peasants. The group, the People's Will, broke off from Land and Liberty. They were revolutionaries, and their main goal was to end czarist autocracy. They committed many terrorist acts and were violent and willing to die for the cause. In 1881, they successfully hurled a bomb that killed Alexander II. 6 of their members were hanged. After the assassination of his father, Alexander III had more of a reactionary policy and retracted many of the reforms of his father, looking more to the autocracy of Nicholas I than the moderate liberalism and reform of his father. And then World War I happened and the Bolsheviks took control, but that's after 1914, so I guess the College Board doesn't really care about that. Anyways, thanks for watching!